On this episode, we're talking about the workhorses, the lifeblood of most NFL teams. That's right, we're talking about running backs. So let's jump on in. And welcome back to the Standard Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Chris, and on this episode, we're talking about fantasy rookie running backs and the immediate impacts that they can have on some of their teams. We got 7 guys on this list that we will go and talk about. I want to get this disclaimer out of the way really quickly is that this is not like last season. We're not going to have a lot of rookie running backs go in the first round. I don't think that there's a rookie running back going to go in the first round. There might be one, and I'll talk about that later when we get to him, but this is not Bijan Robinson. This is not Jahmyr Gibbs. If you look at the totality of last year, there were only really 3 rookie running backs that made significant impacts from a fantasy perspective. And that was Devon Achane, that was Jahmyr Gibbs, and that was Bijan Robinson. Now, we can sprinkle in a couple other guys like Tajay Spears was good at times. We had Keaton Mitchell before his injury was really effective. But for the most part, these guys are going into committees. There's already established guys on those teams. So a lot of these guys, it's going to depend on where they get drafted, as with the wide receivers, on their impact. Now, some of these top guys, there are teams in the NFL that do need a running back. So there are a couple of guys that might be landing on Dallas, let's say, who are going to go into a good offense, who are going to go into a team that has good defense, that, yeah, their offensive line might be rebuilding, but it's a really good scenario for them to jump into, especially if they're one of these higher-end running backs on this list. There are going to be guys on this list that are going to be more early down guys, more pass pro guys, or more third down guys. It's all a matter of where they end up going. But if you look at some of the teams that are coming up, or the younger running backs that are coming up in the league, you know, you're not going to draft anyone behind Bijan right now. You're not going to draft anyone behind Breece Hall. You're not going to draft anyone in Pittsburgh. So there are a lot of teams that already have running backs there that are capable of handling a full workload. So you're not going to waste a higher end draft pick. Most of these guys are going to be day 2, if not early day 3 guys that we're going to talk about on this list. As the draft happens later this month, we'll go a deeper dive once we know where players are, and then we'll see, you know, there's going to be some guys that are late third round or day 3 guys that end up being in really good spots that could break out. I mean, we saw at the end of last season where Chase Brown just absolutely smashed in the fantasy playoffs, and, you know, he was a 5th round guy. And so, you know, there are going to be significant impact players that are going to be drafted in later rounds. The guys that we'll talk about today, starting off with Trey Benson out of Florida State. Now, this is a guy that he is one of 2 guys who I think is going to go in the first round, or a team could reach on him. If you look at a team like Dallas towards the end of the draft, could very much use a player like this. They need a running back desperately in that offense, and I think Trey Benson could be a guy that you can go and draft. Last year at Florida State, he had 905 yards. He had 14 touchdowns on the ground, added another 227 receiving and another touchdown. Now he's 5'10", 210, ran a 4.39 40. He's got incredible speed. My knock on him is that in his college career, he never broke 1,000 yards rushing. So as a premier back, he never showed those flashes. He didn't run for 1,100 yards multiple seasons in a row. What's good about that is he was in a committee there. They used other running backs last year to supplement him, and so he doesn't have a ton of carries on him throughout his college career, which is really good. In terms of his athleticism score, he scored a 9.7 out of 10. He is an absolute freak. He's got great patience, great footwork, great speed, and great lateral movement, phenomenal acceleration, does have that breakaway speed. So this is a guy that I do like, depending on what situation he goes to. If he went to a team like Dallas, he can be a significant impact fantasy player this year. You know, there are other teams on this list there are other teams that are in need for a running back that they just never went and got a guy. I mean, I know The Chargers are another team. They got Gus Edwards there, but they're going to need to draft someone behind them. And it's another team where, depending that what we think the Chargers offense could be with Herbert, you do want to be a running back in that backfield. So that's another good position for him. I just don't see anyone besides Dallas. They're not going to go early in this draft. So you got to think about either a team that trades back into the first round to go and get one of these guys, or you got to think about one of the teams that are lower down on the draft board that could go and get their guy at running back. Last year was an anomaly with having multiple first-round running backs, especially two guys within the top 15 picks. That was absolutely unheard of in recent times. You just don't see running backs go there because you look Devon Achane, Keaton Mitchell. Look at these other guys that go much further back, and not saying that they're equal to Bijan, but I mean you can make the argument that Devon Achane had probably a more significant fantasy output. If he stayed healthy, he would have been the best running back in this class. We wouldn't be talking about Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. We'd be saying Achane is a steal, and he didn't go in the first round. So the next guy on this list that we want to talk about is Jonathon Brooks. Now, in November, he tore his ACL. So in terms of combine stats, he doesn't have any. He only played 11 games last season. But if he didn't have this injury, this would be a guy that would be a first-round running back for sure. He's not going to be a first-round running back based on the injury. More than likely, unless you're in a dynasty league, I would probably not draft him this year because he's probably going to be just a late-season guy. If you're in a keeper league, if you're in a dynasty league, then this is a guy you do want to draft. I would reach on and go and grab because he is going to be an absolute freak. In 11 games last year, he ran for 1,139 yards. He had 10 touchdowns on the ground, added another 141 yards receiving, and another single touchdown on the ground. He is the best one-cut running back in this class before he got hurt. This guy can stop on a dime, change the field, break someone's ankles, and take it 75 yards to the house. He is absolute freak. He is super fast, elite breakaway speed. And what he is he's a really good pass catcher too. So he can be a 3-down back on certain teams. I don't think he's going to end up being that. And again, I don't think he's going to have significant playing time this year, only based on the fact that when you have an ACL tear that late in the season, if he were to torn his ACL in September, October, that'd be one thing. We maybe would see him earlier on, but he didn't participate in combine. He's not going to be participating in training camp. More than likely, he's going to be ready to take the field midway through the season. And at that point, unless he got drafted to a team that their running back goes down, I don't foresee him taking significant work this year. But I do really love his talent prior to his injury. This was the best running back in this class before the injury. It just sucks that it happens so late in the season. You hate to see that. You hate to see that coming from a running back, but he will recover. We've seen running backs come back from ACLs many, many, many times before. He's young enough where he can end up doing that. I'm not too worried about him in the long term. So if you are a dynasty player, don't be afraid to go and draft him. If you are in a keeper league, don't be afraid to go and draft him because he's going to be an impact player 2 years from now when he does eventually take on some starting roles. The next guy on this list that I want to talk about is Jaylen Wright out of Tennessee. Now, this is a guy that he's just a really, really, really tough runner. He is 5'11", 210, ran a 4.38 40. He has elite speed for a running back, and he is just a physical, tough runner. Great one-cut move. He has great patience. This is a guy that can let the offensive line, if CMC wasn't in San Francisco, if he ended up in San Francisco, that'd be a perfect fit for him. Any Shanahan kind of spread run team or zone run schemes, he's going to fit really well in because he has great patience, allowing the blocks to set for him and allowing him to get up the field. He had just over 1,000 yards rushing, 1,013 yards rushing, only 4 touchdowns though. So that's my probably biggest concern is that he's just not an elite scorer. but he does have that breakaway speed, but it's going to be relying on him breaking it away. And as tough as a runner as he is, they didn't really utilize him on the goal line. I don't see him as a 3-down back. I see him as being more of part of a committee in the NFL, which is, you can say it for most of these guys on this list. There's very few running backs that come into the league and garner every touch. I mean, we were the cautionary tale last year on Bijan Robinson, saying that you really should hold off on drafting him early in fantasy drafts because Tyler Algier is still there, and Bijan was not going to come in and take all the touches away. We knew that going into it. We had Tyler Algier being a 1,000-yard rusher the year before, and he's young. If he was an older guy, then Cordell Patterson was still taking some touches away. So you have Bijan coming into an already crowded backfield. We knew he's good talent-wise. We said it many, many times, like he's a very, very good runner. But when you go into a situation, you're drafted into a situation where there are multiple guys there, you can't assume that you're going to go and take 300-400 touches in a season. It's not going to happen in the NFL, not these days. There are very, very few running backs that command that anymore. One of my biggest concerns about Saquon this year is that he's going to a situation where they'd like to use multiple running backs. We saw it with Swift. We thought Swift was going to just tear it up in Philadelphia last year, and he did early in the season. But you look at the second half of the season when they stopped running with just him and they started getting Gainwell and Boston Scott involved. And if there's only 25 rush plays or 30 rush plays per game, and there's 3 people getting those, then it's just cutting into your workload. So there's a lot of guys on this list that I would say be cautionary with because of that, because they're going to go into this situation. I wouldn't draft these guys too high, but it's always nice to go and take a flyer on a rookie running back, especially in the later rounds of a draft, because you never know if they do pop off, then you're going to hit a home run. I mean, you were the guys that drafted A-Chain last year. I mean, you look at what he was able to do at certain points of the season for them. I mean, throwing up 20, 30-point games, it was ridiculous. So the next guy I want to talk about on this list is probably I think the best running back coming out, the best running back that's healthy that's coming out is Blake Corum out of Michigan. This guy is everything you look for in a running back. He's going to be a 3-down back. He's a patient runner, has good hands. He scores, and he knows how to score, and he's a tough, tough runner. This guy had 1,245 yards rushing last season and 27 rushing touchdowns. He had another 117 yards receiving and another touchdown. So 28 total touchdowns last season alone. He's only 5'8", 205, but he did run a 4.5 40. He has very, very, very quick feet, really good vision, and really good instincts. This is a guy who I very, very well could see getting drafted by the Chargers. If they move up into the later first round, if they're afraid that someone's going to go and grab him. But if he ends up in Dallas, this is a guy that can have an immediate fantasy impact. I think if either Trey Benson or Blake Corum ends up there, both these guys can make significant impacts. But if Blake Corum ends up with his head coach from college in LA, that's a really, really good fit for him. I really, really like him as a runner. There's so many good, and this is why I'm not super high on J.J. McCarthy, is because this team was about grounding and pounding, and this was the guy that they did it with. This was their offense last year, was with Blake Corum. And his numbers would have been better, too, if he wasn't sharing the backfield and sharing touches with his counterpart, who's I'm blanking on his name, and I'm not going to sit here and waste time trying to remember it. But this is a guy that I really, really like. I think he can go to a number of teams and make a significant fantasy impact this season. There are a lot of teams out there that need it, and there are a lot of teams out there with aging running backs that, running back is a position where, all you need is a year. You can come off a year of being a significant player. I mean, you look at Dalvin Cook 2 years ago was really good, and then he goes to the Jets. It's, the drop off is so drastic for running backs. So it's always nice to have a deep depth chart. Even the Jets here, Breece Hall's there, but they really don't. They have Izzy Abanikanda behind him, but they don't really have anyone else. And teams like that have like a bell cow running back could go and draft like a day 3 running back out of this class. There's a lot of them that are talented, and there's not a huge gap in need at the top. So these guys are going to fall in the draft. So why wouldn't you go and steal one of them if you could? The next guy I want to talk about is like an absolute freak, is Braelon Allen out of Wisconsin. So he is 6'1", 235. He did not run. He chose not to run in the combine, but he is really fast for his size. He has really good feet for his size. Last year he had 984 yards rushing, had 12 touchdowns, and added another 131 yards receiving. So he had over 1,000 all-purpose yards, and in fact, his senior season was his worst season statistically in his college career. And he's an absolute physical freak. But there's a couple things I like about him, and then there's a couple things I'm really cautious about with him. So first off, he's 20 years old, so he's the youngest running back in this draft class, which is really good. The downside to that is he took over 500 carries in his college career. And so he has, for 20 years old, he has a lot of carries under his belt. There's some of these guys on this list where he's almost double what they were taking. And that's a lot of touches. And you're a big guy. You're getting worn down a lot. But, you are young enough. But he's one of those guys. He's a really, really physical runner. Reminds me a lot of Brandon Jacobs. Just a big bruiser, early down back. This is a guy that can come in and take a lot of the first and second down rolls and a lot of the goal line rolls. This guy is really, really good on the goal line. He scores a lot of touchdowns. He's like I said, a physical freak. And even though he didn't run the 40, you watch his game tape and you realize how quick of feet that he actually does have, and how much he does have some breakaway speed to him. There's a couple other concerns that I have for him, is that he does have some issues fumbling the ball and with ball security. And even though he doesn't have any missed games history, he does get dinged up a lot. And obviously, he's a guy that runs very physically. He's a big guy, so there's a lot of shots going down low at him. So there's a lot of chances for knee injuries, ankle injuries, and with these new tackle rules, I wouldn't be surprised if he's going to get rolled up on by accident because he's so big. And you go against some of these linebackers or some of these secondary guys, and they're going to need to tackle this guy going full speed downhill at them. They're going to try to corral him down any way they can. But this is a guy that, again, if he ends up in a really good scenario, this is a guy that I really like. And again, I don't want to speculate too much. I think there's obvious teams that have needs at running back, but there's a lot of teams where the big picture really starts to flush itself out once the draft happens, and then we'll get into that. So I got two more guys that we'll talk about. This is actually the next guy we're going to talk about is, my favorite guy in this class. Before we talk about him, I just want to do a shameless plug. Don't forget, guys, like and subscribe. Hit that notification button down in the bottom to keep up to date with all of our shorts, all of our content that we drop. We clip down these videos just so you can go one by one. We also timestamp everything, so it should be down below. You can skip ahead to a player that you want to hear about, but don't forget to leave a comment. It really helps out the algorithm and push this video out to more people. We appreciate you guys very much. We are growing. We are just coming up, and the draft is going to be our first full year doing this. So we're really excited for what year 2 is going to bring. We hope to really keep growing as we get more feedback from you guys. But I want to say this is a shameless plug. This is going to be a little pat on the back. We helped over 15 people last season in our first early stages when we only had 200 subscribers in the first season. We helped 15 people win championships last season. Myself included. I made it to the championship. I lost, but I made it there. Then dealing with a lot of injuries last season, we were up to date on the waiver wires. So our production's there. So keep joining our list. We're going to help win you championships. We're going to do it for you. Give us feedback. We're available almost 24/7. Shoot us a comment down in our page. Go to our Instagram page and go ahead and follow us there too. We'll follow up with the last two guys on this list. Ray Davis. This is my favorite running back in this class. I absolutely love him. The more you read about his story, and I don't want to butcher it. But I really encourage you guys to go and watch their videos, or go and read about his story, his upbringing. He is just the epitome of what, television stories should be. He is a guy that was that had a rough upbringing, that made a lot of personal sacrifice, and made it to the show. He transferred schools 3 times, finally went to Kentucky. When he gets to Kentucky, all he does is run for 1,129 yards, 14 touchdowns, added another 323 yards receiving, and 7 touchdowns. This guy had 21 total touchdowns last season. And he's 5'8", 211, and ran a 4.5 240. He's got a lot of speed to him, but his story is incredible, and I can see him going to a team. And this is one of those things where you can just envision Tony Romo or Jim Nantz or the Chris Collinsworth just talking about this guy's story on primetime TV. This is what TV was made for. This is what the NFL is all about. I do see him going to a team and being an absolute superstar there. He is supremely patient. He is one of the best, I think, outside of Blake Corum. I think he is the best running back in this class in terms of overall skill as a running back. Not athleticism, not top-end speed, not breakaway speed, but just he sees the game and plays the game in such a way where he allows the game to come to him. He's really patient, lets the defense flow, waits for his cut, gets back upfield, can see the other side and cut to the other side. He's a little bowling ball too. He's a really good receiver. This is a guy that can be a 3-down back. Reminds me a lot of like Maurice Jones-Drew. When he came out. This is a guy that has not only great patience and balance and vision, but he has really good hands. He's good in pass protection. This is a guy that I see going, and no matter what team he really goes to, unless there's an absolute superstar at that position already, he can make an immediate impact, and he might overtake the running back that's there. And any of these guys on this list, I know Keaton Mitchell's coming off a late season ACL. I can see Baltimore going and signing another running back, a younger running back behind Derrick Henry too. And you got to think of all these teams with aging running backs are probably going to start loading up on some talent. But like I said, when we started off the episode, is that there were only 3 rookie running backs last year that were really fantasy significant. So you can't expect all these guys. We look at the wide receiver class, and there's a lot of guys on that list that can make immediate impacts, but there's not a ton here in this draft that are going to go to a team just because they don't utilize wide receiver or running backs the same way they use wide receivers. But Ray Davis, again, I encourage you to go and read his story. Just an incredible story for him. And this is a player that I can, absolutely fell in love with. The more I read into him, the more I watched his game film and broke that down. The last guy on this list that we're going to talk about is Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. This is another guy that I think is very, very complete back. He only ran for 820 yards, had 9 touchdowns, ran for 7.1 yards per carry, and had 232 yards receiving. Now, in an offense that was completely dominated by Caleb Williams and the passing attack, the Cliff Kingsbury offense, that was what's going to happen from the running back position. He's 5'9", 220, good size, ran a 4.4 640, good speed. He has great lateral speed and really good patience as well. Now, the biggest issue that I have with him is his fumbling issue. He does have an issue securing the ball, and at times just is lazy with handling the football. What I will say about it, again, positive things, is he's probably the most pro-ready in terms of pass protection. Coming out of the guys that we talked about for sure, but he's one of the best pass pros of the top end running backs coming out in this draft class, and he's a good pass catcher. So this is a guy that can immediately come in and be a 3rd-down back on some team, whatever team he goes to, not only as a pass catcher but in pass protection, which is really, really valuable. I think it's something that we don't consider from a fantasy perspective, but if he's on the field more, that's more opportunity. I don't care if it's for pass protection, but if he's on the field, let's say he's in for pass protection and they do a scramble drill and he gets out as a safety valve, that's more touches. I'd rather a guy be on the field especially as a rookie, the more opportunity he's going to get to be on the field, the better it is from a fantasy perspective. So I think that he can really cut out a little carving for himself. Now, this, again, he would have to go to a really, really good scenario for him to be fantasy relevant. I don't think he is. I think he's the least likely on this list, other than Jonathon Brooks, of course, this year, to be a fantasy impact player, because I do think that Trey Benson and Blake Corum are going to be the guys that go to a team that needs a running back right now that they're going to start. Marshawn Lloyd is going to go to a committee, and that's fine. And he's going to evolve into taking his role. But think of like Zach Charbonnet last year, or Roschon Johnson last year. There's so many other guys that got drafted that were pretty high up and getting drafted above some of these other guys that really just carved out a third down role for themselves. And yeah, at times they were good, and maybe in PPR, like they had their moments, but as a fantasy long impact, like they weren't even good best ball players. Like they weren't blowing it up. They maybe had 1 week each where they're like in a top 20 position. That's where I think Marshawn Lloyd is going to be, even though I think his talent's there. Again, I think he's the most pro ready of any of these guys in terms of the entire scope of being a running back. But in terms of his opportunity, I don't think that he has, he has the elite speed, but he wasn't getting touches there. They shared backfield committee there. So there is some good things because he doesn't have a ton of carries under his belt. Transferred from South Carolina to USC, was going to go and make a run at it. USC, failed miserably last season when they lost 5 games in the Pac-12 in the last season of the Pac-12. So, those are the 7 guys that I had for you today. Later on this week, we're going to be dropping a tight end episode. There's not a lot of tight ends that we're going to talk about. There's probably maybe 4 or 5 of them that I think are going to have significant impacts in fantasy this season. But like I said, drop a comment on what your opinion is, who you really like, who you think your team, or who you want your team to go and draft. If you're in dynasty leagues, we love to hear you. Where are you guys drafting these guys? Where are you guys going after some of these younger rookie running backs, especially in your rookie redrafts or any of the dynasty leagues? So, these are going to be guys that down the road, especially Blake Corum, Benson, Brooks, Wright. I think all those guys have really good long-term talent, and I think it's going to be a year or two before they really start flashing what they're made of. But whoever goes to Dallas, whoever goes to the Chargers, they're probably going to get significant playing time this year just because there's no real talent in front of them. Unless Dallas goes and trades or signs someone. I don't know who they're going to sign at this point. Maybe Dalvin Cook, Zeke Elliott they'll bring back. But again, it's going to be a piecemeal by committee. I mean, there's pretty much every other team is solidified at their RB1 position. So I don't see them really coming in and stealing a ton of carries away from those guys. But that's all I got for you today. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell just to keep up to date with all of our stuff. We really love and appreciate you guys. And as we continue to grow, we love the feedback. Keep reaching out, keep commenting. We'd love to hear it from you guys. We try to comment back as much as possible. Other than that, I'll see you guys next time.